The beginning is a haze, my personal history of South Africa. Today I begin something I have long postponed, not out of neglect but reverence. I begin my personal history of South Africa. I say personal deliberately. For what is history, if not a mirror angled slightly differently in each person's hand? One man's monument is another man's wound. One tribe's triumph is another's exile. The nation we call South Africa has never belonged to one voice. Neither will this telling. Yet as I step forward, I find myself engulfed by wild winds. East, west, north, and south, each direction calls with equal urgency. I am being pulled. The paths are many, and none of them straight. Do I begin with Adam Koch, who trekked not for cattle or conquest, but for sovereignty of spirit? Do I start with the Bantu peoples, those labeled Black African, whose rhythms of life and governance carved order into the heart of the continent? Or should I call forth the windswept ghosts of the Khoisan, the first men and women, those whose DNA is written into the very soil we walk on, and yet whose stories were swept aside like desert sand? What of the Portuguese with their crosses and cannons, the Spaniards with their fevered ambitions, or the British who arrived with contracts in one hand and empire in the other? Their shadow is long, their legacy complex. Should I reach towards the enterprise and elegance of the Indian merchant, disembarking in Durban with nothing but a bag of spices, a ledger, and an indomitable will? Or do I dare to begin nowhere and everywhere at once? This journey will not be linear. You will not find in these pages a dutiful march from century to century. No, my history is not a textbook. It is a memory forest. Dense, slippery, meandering. The kind where a compass is useless and the only way forward is through instinct and echoes. Some days I may drift toward the diverse heritage archive. Other days I may lean into folklore whispered by my grandmother's lips. Sometimes I may pause and sit with the present, because it too is history in motion. So where do I begin? Perhaps I begin not with a place or a person, but a question. What does it mean to belong to this land? Not as a ruler or a subject, but as a soul? Welcome to my South African journey. The path will not be smooth, but I promise it will be real. Chapter 1. The Voortrekker Within. The road to South Africa as a modern state starts with the wagons, the blood, the stubbornness, and yes, the vision they carried across Velden River. Before I begin the winding journey of my own South African story, I must pause to honor the strange compass that led us here. The one Europeans followed in pursuit of India, but which instead unveiled the southern tip of Africa. In the early 1400s, while Europe wrestled with war and empire, a visionary prince, named Henry the Navigator, opened a school in a Portuguese town called Lagos. He did not command armies. He trained sailors. And from this quiet coastal school, a new age of exploration began. Portuguese ships hugged the coast of Africa, inching southward, mapping the unknown. Then, in 1488, Bartholomew Diaz braved the swirling storms and saw it. The southern tip of this mighty continent. A place he called the Cape of Storms, which his king wisely renamed the Cape of Good Hope. It was a threshold, a promise, a turning point in the quest for the riches of the East. Soon after, Vasco da Gama rounded this cape and reached India in 1494. Meanwhile, in the same era, Christopher Columbus, sailing for Spain, aimed for India but stumbled upon the Americas in 1492. That India was not the one they sought, but it opened a different door in the West. The point is this. The Cape, what we now call Cape Town, has been in European consciousness and hands since 1488. It was never just a port. It was a prize, a pivot, a place where continents conversed. Then came the Dutch, who displaced the Portuguese in 1652 and made the Cape their station of power. But Europe, ever restless, could not contain its internal tensions. Religious wars erupted, and the Huguenots, French, Protestants fleeing Catholic persecution, found refuge at the Cape. Together with the Dutch, these settlers blended into something new, a people not quite European anymore, a people of the soil, a people who spoke a new tongue, born from Dutch but shaped by Africa and French echoes. That group became known as the Afrikaners. They planted vineyards, built farms, formed churches, created law, but beneath their calm was a restlessness. In 1806, the British arrived, and with superior systems, naval strength, and expanding imperial ambition, they took the Cape. The Dutch Afrikaners, now subjects in their own land, did not forget, and, like a stone dropped in water, they split, not just geographically, but spiritually. They left, They loaded their ox wagons, packed their Bibles, and pointed inland away from British control. What followed was one of the most defining migrations in this country's story, the Great Trek. Chapter 2. India in the soul of South Africa. If the Cape of Good Hope was Europe's southern threshold to the east, then it follows naturally that India and South Africa are connected by more than ocean currents. They are bound by history, trade, wines, exile, and vision. From the very beginning, the modern shape of South Africa was shaped by this connection. The European obsession with reaching India birthed the age of discovery, and it was in the pursuit of India that the Portuguese rounded our southern tip. So, in a strange twist of fate, India lies at the spiritual root of modern South Africa. But this was more than a maritime accident. Over time, this connection deepened. It became human. The arrival of Indians in the 1860s, the sugar fields of Natal, needed hands. The British, now ruling both South Africa and India, turned eastward and brought thousands of indentured laborers, men and women from the villages of Tamil Nadu, Uttar Pradesh, Bihar, and Gujarat. They came with little, often tricked or coerced, packed into ships with names like Truro and Belvedere. They landed in a strange place, a place where they were neither white enough to rule nor black enough to belong. And yet, they stayed, they survived, they built, they farmed cane, then opened shops. They built temples beside dusty roads. They carried spices, scriptures, and a silent dignity. From indentured laborers, they became traders, teachers, and doctors. South Africa did not swallow them. They rooted, and today in every corner of Durban, in the fabric of our nation's food business and faith, you see their fingerprints. Gandhi's South African pilgrimage, but perhaps the most profound India-South Africa connection is not material, but moral. Before Gandhi became the Mahatma, before the Salt March, before he challenged the British Empire, he was a young lawyer, and it was South Africa that shaped him. He arrived in 1893, full of English manners and legal ambition, hired by an Indian businessman in Natal. But here on African soil, he was thrown off a train in Pietermaritzburg for daring to sit in a white's only carriage. And from that moment, something shifted. Gandhi spent 21 years here. He founded Phoenix Settlement. He published Indian Opinion. He developed Satyagraha, the philosophy of non-violent resistance. His soul was awakened here. And from that awakening, India itself would be transformed. It is no exaggeration to say the moral heart of modern India began in South Africa. And by extension, South Africa carries India in its bones. Two nations, one thread. So when we speak of the beginning of modern South Africa, we must remember this. It is not only a Dutch and British tale. It is an Indian one too, the sugarcane. Fields of Natal and the courtrooms of Johannesburg shaped lives that would echo across continents. India and South Africa, two nations separated by sea, yet forever interwoven. Their connection is not decorative. It is foundational. One gave rise to Gandhi. The other gave him purpose. One brought laborers. The other gave them legacy. In this soil, they planted more than crops. They planted identity, courage, and conscience. And so, as I continue this journey through the tangled roots of South Africa's history, I carry India with me, not as a visitor, but as a founding presence. Chapter 3. The long apprenticeship of Gandhi, forged in South African fire. Before he was the Mahatma, before millions followed his footsteps across the salt flats of India, Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi was a hesitant, young lawyer with a Western education and an Eastern soul. Stepping off a ship into the dry heat of Durban in 1893, he was 24. He wore a turban, carried legal books, and spoke Queen's English. But this land, our land, would not be charmed by his etiquette or vocabulary. It met him with a slap. He was thrown off a train in Pietermaritzburg for sitting in a whites-only carriage, despite holding a valid first-class ticket. That moment, cold, humiliating, unforgettable, lit a fire in him. What began as a legal assignment for a Gujarati merchant became a 21-year odyssey that transformed the man, and through him, the world. Becoming Gandhi, it was here, in the burning heart of colonial South Africa, that Gandhi first confronted the brutal machinery of racial hierarchy. Indians, both indentured and free, were treated as lesser beings, squeezed between white supremacy and black dispossession. In this harsh crucible, Gandhi learned three vital truths. Dignity must be defended, not begged for. Resistance does not always need to be violent to be powerful. Law, without soul, becomes a weapon of oppression. It was here that he developed the radical idea of satyagraha, truth force, a philosophy that would later shake the foundations of empires. He tested it not in the streets of Delhi but South Africa. Chapter 4. Smuts and the Scheme of Union, Dreaming a Nation from Fractures. From Gandhi's fire of conscience, we now turn to Jan Smuts, a man of the mind, the map and the mountain. Where Gandhi sought spiritual liberation, Smuts labored over political integration, a way to bind the fractured parts of South Africa into a single functioning state. Gandhi gave us moral tools. Smuts gave us a scheme. The young architect of Audiobook in 1870 in the rural Cape, Jan Christian Smuts grew up on a wheat farm and spoke Afrikaans before he learned English. But this farm boy's mind was vast. He inhaled philosophy, law, science, and strategy. At Cambridge, he outshone even the English elite, earning double first-class honours. But Smuts did not stay in ivory towers. He returned home with a mission: to imagine a united South Africa, not as a patchwork of warring provinces, but as one nation, coherent and respected among world powers. After the wars, a plan turned following the bloody Anglo-Boer War, 1899-1902, in Khoisan, which British might crushed Boer independence, Smuts made a surprising pivot. Instead of holding on to bitterness, he saw a future in reconciliation. He believed that the only path forward was to unite the former Boer republics and British colonies into a single political entity. This was not just about peace. It was strategic. A union meant control of policy, economy, military power. A union meant negotiating with the British Empire from a position of strength, not as scattered colonies, but as a single state. Alongside Louis Botha, Smuts became the chief architect of the Union of South Africa, forged in 1910, bringing together the Cape Colony, Natal, the Transvaal, and the Orange Free State under one parliament. It was a masterstroke of diplomacy and intellect. And yet, it was also deeply flawed. A union, but not for all. Smuts' vision united whites, but excluded black South Africans, Indians and coloureds from political representation and full citizenship. The union was a bridge for some, and a wall for many others. He could draft constitutions, lead in war, sit beside Churchill at world summits, yet failed to see the fire already burning in the hearts of the oppressed, the philosopher-statesman. What made Smuts unique was that he was not just a politician, he was a thinker of the highest order. He coined the term holism, believing the universe functioned not through chaos but integrated wholes. He saw South Africa the same way, a fractured land needing cohesion. But in focusing on unifying its white components, he ignored the deeper fractures that would later erupt with ferocity. The legacy of a builder, Smuts built something real. For better or worse, modern South Africa was born under his pen. He was admired globally, one of the few South Africans whose signature appears on the founding documents of both the League of Nations and the United Nations. Chapter 5. The Day the Dust Settled. Vereeniging. 1902, the war had gone on too long. By May 1902, South Africa was no longer a battlefield. It was a bleeding carcass, scorched by fire and starved of breath. The land itself seemed exhausted. Even the wind moved differently, less like a breeze, more like a weary sigh brushing over blackened veld. The once proud Boer commandos had been reduced to shadows. Their homes burned, families scattered, women and children imprisoned in camps where disease stalked like a silent predator. British might had prevailed, not just through bullets but through attrition, through hunger, through thunderous superiority. Thai. Mood was not victory. It was fatigue. Even the generals looked aged, eyes sunken from sleeplessness and moral wrestling. The days before, in the final week of May, representatives from both the British Crown and the defeated Boer republics assembled in the small drab mining town of Vereeniging, south of Johannesburg. The town, named for union in Dutch, seemed almost cruelly ironic. There was no music, no trumpets, just rain the night before. A soft spitting drizzle that coated the dust in a thin skin of mud. The sky hung low, grey and undecided. Even the birds seemed subdued, keeping to the thorn trees as if watching history with quiet judgment. Inside the hall, the men sat with heavy coats and heavier hearts. They did not shake hands. They did not smile. They stared into the silence, into the corners of the room, or down at their boots, worn leather that had marched too many miles. The morning of the peace, May 31st, 1902. A pale sun rose behind a curtain. of mist. The chill in the air was sharp, not yet winter, but cold enough to keep the bones stiff and conversations short. Chapter 6. While empires negotiated, Sefako Makgatho planted seeds as the ink dried on the Treaty of Vereeniging, and white leaders sealed the fate of the land between themselves. Another story was already unfolding, quietly, persistently, and without permission. It is important we pause here. To speak only of Boer and Brit, of wagons and treaties, while ignoring the millions of black Africans watching history from the margins, would be not just incomplete, it would be dishonest. So, let us be clear. The Bantu peoples, Amazulu, Basotho, Bapedi, Xhosa, Tswana, Tsonga, Venda, Ndebele, had not vanished. They were watching, listening, enduring, and organizing. The quiet work of Sefako Makgatho, while Jan Smuts was sketching a union with maps and constitutions, and while Gandhi was discovering the power of protest, a lesser-known figure was tending to something even more profound, black political consciousness. His name was Sefako Makgatho, a teacher, a journalist, a man of deep intellect and even deeper conviction. He did not march with guns or sit at treaty tables. Instead, he sowed seeds. From his base in Pretoria, he began envisioning a national platform for Africans, a forum where chiefs, teachers, clerks, and workers could speak with one voice. He built networks. He wrote. He taught. He laid the intellectual and strategic groundwork for something monumental. And in 1912, that vision took root in Bloemfontein. The South African Native National Congress, what we now know as the ANC, was born. While empires carved borders and negotiated race-based unions, black South Africans were preparing their own counter-union, a spiritual, cultural, and political response to exclusion. Makgatho would go on to become the second president of the ANC. But more than that, he became a founder of the African future, not through battle, but through vision, through patient resistance, and through belief in a democratic destiny. A nation within a nation. So let it be said, at the same time that white South Africa was ours being drawn on paper, black South Africa was being forged in the hearts of its people, not through treaties, through memory, through story, through the dream of belonging on their own land. Makgatho's fingerprints are on the soul of South Africa, just as surely as Smuts are on its state. Two dreams, one land, and a long road to reconciliation between them. Chapter 7. The Fire That Gathered. Fathers of the African Congress. While the white men of war signed the Peace of Vereeniging and mapped out a union to serve their image of civilization, a different kind of Congress was already in the making. A Congress born not in marble halls or foreign palaces, but in churches, classrooms, print shops, and the restless hearts of the forgotten majority. These men were not generals. They were teachers, preachers, journalists, lawyers, translators, thinkers. They held no guns, but they carried something sharper, a clear mind and a burning purpose. Let us name them. Let us gather them into history's light, for they stood as the true founders of the African future. Sefako Makgatho, the steady organizer. Sefako Makgatho was a multifaceted personal of great gravitas and powerful character. He was the heavyweight leader who guided and organized the founding of the African National Congress. He was the supreme leader of Transvaal, the most powerful bloc of African leadership. He was actually proposed to become the first ANC president, yet refused and declined the crown, much like what Julius Caesar did. What a man. A man of calm strength and tireless networking, Makgatho laid the groundwork for national unity long before it was fashionable. As a teacher and president of the Transvaal Native Congress, he believed that education, political structure, and dignity must walk together. Later, he would become the second president of the ANC, John Langalibalele Dube, the first president, a man who believed in self-reliance and taught it. He is the first man to see education as the powerful tool of emancipation. He was restless and rooted in education and less on politics. That is the reason why he was not there in Bloemfontein when the ANC was founded. Nevertheless, he was a respected leader. And it was Sefako Makgatho that proposed, despite him absent, he must still be elected as a leader, publisher, educator, visionary. Dube was the first president of the South African Native National Congress in 1912. A man trained in the US and deeply rooted in Zulu heritage, he founded Ulang Institute to show that black self-reliance was not theory. It was practice. His pen, his voice, his posture, presidential before he was ever elected. Sol Plaatje, the voice of the people, a restless man. He acted more like a foreign affairs minister. He never lost touch with Britain that made him. Sharp mind, sharp. Ideas, sharp vision. Determined. Energetic and all-rounder man of impeccable credentials. Sharp-witted and multilingual, Solomon Tshekisho Plaatje was the soul of African journalism. He documented the injustice of land dispossession and was the first General Secretary of the ANC. His writings, especially Native Life in South Africa, gave the world a mirror it didn't want to face. He carried the cause across oceans, from Kimberley to London. Dr. Walter Rubusana, the bridge between church and parliament, the first black member of the Cape Parliament. A scholar, theologian, and fierce voice for African upliftment, Rubusana understood the power of both scripture and state. He was instrumental in organizing African education and defended the spiritual dignity of his people. He was a deeply spiritual man who created pathways where African spirituality could be understood within the Christian gospel. Quiet and wise man, but a very powerful speaker. Pixley ka Isaka Seme, the dreamer who named the moment, educated at Columbia and Oxford, Seme, was the architect of words. His famous 1906 essay, The Regeneration of Africa, lit a fire across the continent. It was Sem who called for a union of Africans, a congress of all tribes, a unified resistance to the colonial project. It was his vision that became the ANC's founding mission. Meshach Pelem, the journalist who brought the word, editor of Imvo Zabansundu, Pelem used the power of the press to stir public consciousness. In a time when newspapers shaped minds, he gave the African people a platform to speak back, critique power, and imagine something greater than survival. Alfred Mangena, the legal mind. One of the earliest black lawyers in South Africa, Mangena, brought legal literacy into the black political struggle. He stood before unjust courts and used the law, not to beg for mercy, but to demand justice. His intellect and advocacy laid a path for future legal warriors. A congress is born in January 1912 in a modest building in Bloemfontein. These men and others gathered. The African National Congress was born, a flame that would become a wildfire. They lit this fire. It began as a platform for dignity, for the right to speak, for land, for a nation that did not exist in the minds of colonizers, but lived fiercely in the hearts of the people. They were not perfect men, but they were men of purpose. They carried a dream before it became fashionable to dream, and now we remember them, not as side notes, but as founders in their own right. While union houses were built on sandcastles of racial compromise, these men built a foundation out of faith, language, and light. The soil remembers them. They were forthright and men of vision and foresight. If you want to know about the great philosophy of Ubuntu and wisdom, then come to these men. So must we. Chapter 8. The Entrance of Nelson Mandela. Interrupted Convergence. When the wildcat swung. By the late 1940s, two forces were evolving, slowly, clumsily, but not without promise. On one side, Afrikanerdom was shedding its old fear of British domination and solidifying its grip on power. After decades of trauma, from the scorched earth of the Anglo-Boer War to the humiliation of the British flag waving over Pretoria, the Afrikaner was no longer just surviving. He was building schools, banks, newspapers, political machines, a language, an economy, a nation. All of it slowly rising from the ashes of 1902. On the other side, the ANC was also maturing. From a gathering of intellectuals and chiefs in Bloemfontein, it had grown into a platform of dignity, a place for dialogue, negotiation, petitions, and principle. Leaders like Dr. A.B. Xuma and Dr. James Moroka believed in engagement, not anarchy. They had no illusions about white power, but they still believed that justice could be reasoned with. These were men of wisdom and wits, not sabers. They petitioned the crown. They wrote letters instead of lighting fires. Their strength was moral, not militant. Calm and collected. Men of character. There was underneath all the noise a slow convergence happening, painfully slow but natural. Afrikaner nationalism and African nationalism were beginning to walk the same road, even if on opposite pavements. Then came the wild swing, the wildcat called Nelson Mandela. I called him cancer and a demon. I will tell you the reasons why, by and by. Just be patient and do not boil. At the tail end of the 1940s, a young, impatient, confident man entered the scene. His name was Nelson Mandela. He did not come with a voice of prayer or a pen of protest. He came swinging, like a wild cat in a delicate room of dialogue. He was charming but disruptive, brave but blunt. He wanted action, confrontation, and change now. And for that, many adored him. But let us speak the truth. Nelson Mandela interrupted the evolution of the ANC. He brought with him a new militancy, shaped not by the humble wisdom of Moroka or Rubusana, but by Marxist fire and communist doctrine. He aligned with global revolutionaries, who did not understand South Africa's long, complex threads of negotiation and nuance. He saw slow progress as betrayal. He preferred agitation to argument, the fall of Moroka, and the rise of fire. In 1952, at the height of the Defiance campaign, Mandela accused the old wise man Dr. James Moroka, then president of the ANC, of cowardice and weakness. Moroka, a Christian, doctor and a man of deep humility, had pleaded for moderation. He had warned of chaos and called for calm mind and wisdom. For that, he was humiliated by communist-controlled Nelson Mandela, pushed aside and cast out by the very movement he had led. His dignity meant nothing. He was pushed from his chair by Nelson Mandela and fell on the ground in sorrow and shame, and communist-controlled Nelson Mandela laughed and proclaimed victory over the old wise man. He pushed him down from the chair. The Congress was no longer a gathering of elders and educators. It was becoming a battleground. Mandela, with his comrades in the ANC Youth League, redirected the river, and it has flowed that way ever since. Today, the marks remain. The ANC, once rooted in Christian values, African customs, and constitutional reasoning, was infiltrated by communist ideology, foreign slogans, clenched fists, and militant posturing. Even today, the party's internal contradictions echo from that pivot. Nelson Mandela would go on to suffer nobly, to become a global icon, but we must still say it, he broke the line of the founding fathers. He broke away from African values, African ways of seeing things, and fell to the spell of communism. Became he a cancer and a demon. Communism is destructive, not constructive. While these African leaders were evolving in natural evolution, the communist-controlled Nelson Mandela was devolution, the very opposite of Africanism, wild and wired to communism, a foreign ideology that he imposed on African values of wisdom, humility, and calmness in the midst of storms and frustrations. He abandoned their method, their patience, their belief in persuasion over revolution. History demands we speak both grace and grit. This is not an attack. It is a reckoning. Mandela was many things: necessary, magnetic, courageous. But he was not a continuation of Makgatho, John Dube, or Plaatje, Pixley Seme. He was oid. He soared. Tares not wheat. He broke the harmony and the gradual evolution of South Africa, and history must be brave enough to hold both truths. That a legend rose, and in doing so silenced a lineage of dialogue and wisdom that was already building and mellowing to something real. We must learn from that, not in bitterness, but in balance. Chapter 9. Mandela, a hero, but whose son was he? Let's dismantle the shrine, not out of bitterness, but for the sake of truth. Let's turn this chapter into what it truly must be: a historic reckoning, a moral confrontation, and an unveiling of the man behind the monument. This is the chapter that won't be taught in schools, but must be felt in the bones of every thinking South African. South Africa is trapped in a cathedral of edited memory. The man on the banknotes, the statue in Sandton, the name on every hospital, school, and highway. We are taught not to think about him, only to thank him. But a free country does not fear questions, and a mature nation does not preserve its myths at the expense of its memory. So let us ask again, with boldness, with precision, whose son was Nelson Mandela really? He was born in light. He was born in the hills of the Eastern Cape, a region soaked in the sacred. A land walked by Teosoga, the first black ordained Presbyterian minister in Southern Africa. A land where Christian mission schools taught not just arithmetic, but character. Where manhood was defined not by militancy, but by moral excellence. Mandela was shaped by the Methodist order. He was surrounded by black leaders of discipline and dignity. Men like Sefako Makgatho, the second president of the ANC and a towering Methodist figure. Makgatho was a man who believed in order, dialogue, faith, and African honor. Mandela once said he was spellbound by Makgatho's moral power. So moved was he that when his first son was born, he named him Makgatho Mandela, not after an ancestor, but after a spiritual father. That naming was not casual. It was reverent. Mandela began his journey under the guidance of African Christian moral giants, but he did not remain under their shadow. Then he turned. Mandela married Evelyn Mace, a nurse and devout Christian, a woman of quiet strength, prayer, and tradition. But their marriage was crushed under the weight of political ambition. He accused her of being too religious, too reserved, too committed to values he no longer held. What really happened? Mandela began walking away, not just from Evelyn, but from everything he was raised to honor. He admitted it himself. After I left Evelyn, I followed a path of immoral life. That sentence, his own words, was removed from Long Walk to Freedom, censored, scrubbed by editors who wanted a saint, not a soul, but truth cannot be censored from the heart of a nation. And Mandela knew he had crossed a moral line. He had left not just a wife, but a path. He abandoned the tradition of Makgatho, Dube, Rubusana. He no longer walked in the rhythm of African Christian moral clarity. He entered a new hall. The Marxist temptation. Mandela traded robes for rhetoric. He fell into the embrace of white Marxist intellectuals, Joe Slovo, Ruth First, Moses Kotane, Ronnie Kasserils, Ben Turok. He sat at their tables. He read their books. He quoted their gods, Lenin, Marx, Trotsky. Gone were the echoes of the Psalms. Gone were the proverbs of the elders. Gone was the humility of African fathers who understood power as service, not spectacle. He walked out of the church and into the chambers of ideology. He raised a clenched fist where once he would have bowed his head in prayer. A black man in white costume. Let us ask a harder question. What do we call it when a black man raised in royal tradition, mission school discipline, and African ancestral pride abandons all of it to imitate European revolutionaries? Is that evolution? Or is that sophisticated imitation? Is that progress or an inferiority complex dressed in red rhetoric? He did not seek to build from our spiritual foundations. He reached for foreign fire and carried it like a torch. Not seeing it would burn the very moral framework that raised him. He left the fathers behind. He stopped quoting Tiosoga. He stopped speaking with the voice of Rubusana. He no longer thought like Makgatho. He postured in courtrooms. He marched with fists instead of moral authority. He swapped ancestral wisdom for borrowed slogans. Yes, he became an icon. But icons can be interrogated. And we must say it plainly. Mandela did not continue the line of the founding African leaders. He strayed from the path of African measured wisdom. He broke it. And South Africa has never returned to that moral lineage. The cost of the pivot, he chose militancy over memory. He chose ideology over integrity. He chose white communists over black Christian elders. And we are still living with the consequences. It no longer values humility. It rewards applause. Why? Because the moral compass was abandoned. And when the leader walks off the path, the people soon follow. This chapter is not written in bitterness. It is written in love of truth. And we must ask, what would South Africa have looked like if Mandela had remained faithful to the path of Sefako Makgatho? What if he had led not with foreign fire, but with African calm, humble light? These are not accusations. They are inquiries.
Communism has got nothing in common with African values of growth and patience. Communism seeks to destroy what is there. African values and traditions are predisposed in the natural order of things that change by evolution. African values are steeped in spirituality. Everyone knows that communism is a godless monstrosity. African values respect and nurture the idea of a family. Communism sees the family as the enemy, for it seeks control of the people. To have a family and parents in control of their children is against the social engineering that lies at the root and heart of communism, where people, in particular the youth, must be controlled and shaped by communist ideology. African values appreciates the spirit of individual liberty, spirit of enterprise and individual creativity. Communism is about equality and collectivization. So Nelson Mandela abandoned African Christian values and got baptized into the religion of godless communism. That is what it is. He literally and openly denounced African Christian values, and according to his words, went on a path in the moral life. This is what he said himself. He divorced his wife Evelyn because she was a Christian. That is exactly what Mandela says in his Long Walk to Freedom book. The ANC was founded by men and women of Christian faith. There was no communism in the midst of the ANC. The ANC was founded in 1912 in Bloemfontein by Christians. The event opened up with Prayer Not a Mandela. They were gospel songs in the midst of the speeches. The atmosphere was of calm, wisdom, and prayer, not fiery rhetoric. And that continued for 3 decades until that Nelson Mandela appeared and crushed the spirit. Drunk with a fiery communist spirit was destruction. Nelson Mandela set himself diametrically opposed to those who built the ANC, those who came ahead of him. He became a pupil and student of communists like Joe Slovo, and was like a puppet used by these communists to enter into the realm of Africans' worldview and tear down African values, and replace with communism. And that is where we are now. That is where South Africa is now, ruled and governed by communist ANC. Certainly, let me repeat, communism has absolutely nothing in common with the core of African values. Where African tradition teaches growth, patience, respect for the spiritual order, and evolution through wisdom, communism charges in like a wrecking ball. Its very essence is destruction. Communism does not build. It dismantles. It does not nurture. It seizes and controls. African values are rooted in spiritual consciousness. They honor family. They uphold the dignity of the household, the sacred role of parents, elders, and community. In contrast, communism views the family as an obstacle to the totalitarian grip it seeks. It aims to control the soul of the youth, reshape them through ideological manipulation, and erase the inherited wisdom of their traditions. African culture celebrates initiative, enterprise, and the sacred duty of personal responsibility. Communism suffocates all of this under the tyranny of equality through enforced collectivization. Let it be known, Nelson Mandela turned his back on African Christian values. He did not walk the path of our forefathers. He denounced the morality of his upbringing and publicly confessed to adopting what he called an immoral life. These are his own words in Long Walk to Freedom. He left his wife Evelyn because she was a devout Christian. That is a fact. That is truth. And that is the path he chose. The African National Congress was not born of Marxist fire. It was born of Christian faith and African dignity. Founded in 1912 in Bloemfontein, the ANC's birth was wrapped in gospel hymns, prayer, and wise deliberation, not in militant slogans or ideological warfare. For 3 decades, the ANC was a place of spiritual resolve, moral clarity, and unity in vision. Then came Mandela, and everything changed. Drunk on the doctrine of destruction, Mandela did not continue the legacy of the founders. He betrayed it. Under the influence of communists like Joe Slovo, he became a vessel, a carrier of foreign ideologies designed to tear down our African spiritual worldview. He was no longer walking in the steps of the founders. He was marching to the drumbeat of Marx, Lenin, and Stalin. And with him came the slow death of African values in South African governance. This is why today, South Africa is ruled by a godless, spiritually disconnected ANC. An ANC that pretends to speak for the people but has long abandoned the soul of its founders. This is not progress. This is not freedom. This is cultural suicide. It's time to say it plainly. Communism is not African. It is an imported monstrosity. It is anti-family, anti-spiritual, anti-freedom. And those who led us into its arms turn their backs on the soul of Africa.
Chapter 10. What if the ANC never left the mission road? What if the ANC had never turned away from its first light? What if the Congress had remained the house of Makgatho's discipline, Dube's faith, Rubusana's ancestral wisdom, and Soga's prophetic voice? Imagine this, a Congress of conscience not conquest the ANC, rooted in African Christian ethics, would have grown not into a party of slogans and struggle songs, but into a Congress of conscience, a parliament of the people before parliament itself was possible. There would have been no need for Moscow, no borrowed revolutions, no second-hand ideologies pretending to liberate what they did not understand. The ANC's primary document would not be the Freedom Charter, written under heavy communist influence, but something more like a moral charter, a covenant grounded in Ubuntu, guided by Christian virtue and shaped by African cosmology. Its language would not be seize the means, but restore the soul, a leadership culture of integrity. In this alternate path, the culture of leadership would have been different. Leaders would not compete for tenders and limousines, but for character. Public service would not be seen as a stepping stone to wealth, but a calling, a duty to serve as Moses did, not to rule as Pharaoh. Ministers would quote proverbs and African proverbs, not just political speeches. Cabinets would begin with a moment of silence or prayer, not just backroom deals. In this world, there would be no need for commissions of inquiry, because the moral bar would already be high enough to prevent corruption. Not just expose it, schools as temples of wisdom. In this version of history, South Africa's schools would not be sites of violence and broken chalkboards. No, they would be temples of wisdom, echoing the legacy of Olange Institute founded by John Dube. Education would not be a broken promise. It would be a national altar. Children would be taught not just arithmetic but ethics, not just STEM but soul. Each classroom would be seen as a battlefield for dignity, not indoctrination. The land question handled with honor. The land question, our deepest wound, would not be answered with expropriation rhetoric or silent greed. Instead, it would be approached with restorative thinking. Land reform under this moral ANC would be sacred work. It would involve restitution, yes, but with wisdom, not rage. Tribal wisdom, Christian stewardship, and Ubuntu jurisprudence would guide the process. No land grabs, no political theater, just justice. Quiet, powerful justice. We would be living in an age of black excellence, not black entitlement. Self-reliance, not state reliance. The nation that could have been. This path would have required courage. Today we might have had a South Africa that is not only free, but moral. Not only democratic, but disciplined. Not only united, but rooted. It would be a country where churches and chiefs still shape civic life. Where leadership smells like dignity, not scandal. Where the ANC still feels like a Congress of the people, not a crumbling brand name. The door we closed, but we did not choose this path. Mandela and his comrades took the other road, through Moscow, through Marx, through fire. And here we are. But imagining this what if is not wasted energy. It is an act of historical recovery, a way to touch the better future we still might build if we remember the path we left behind, because the road of Makgatho, Dube and Soga is still there, waiting. Interlude. Sefako Makgatho and the instruments of civilized resistance. Think about it. Sefako Makgatho, a man born into colonial fire, denied the rights of citizenship, stripped of national belonging, never once called for rage in the streets. He did not tell Africans to drive the white man to the sea or kill the Boer. He did not chant like a wild animal trying to mimic revolution. No, he picked up the pen. He wielded words, not to curse but to craft. He studied law. He led with logic. He chose organization over outrage. Makgatho understood something today's leaders have forgotten. To be angry is human, but to lead, you must be more than human. You must be mature. He addressed kings and parliaments, not mobs and burning tires. He formed alliances, wrote petitions, sat at tables, and articulated demands with the full weight of African intelligence and dignity. He was not a coward. He was measured. He was not weak. He was wise. And in his restraint there was more revolution than in 1,000 fists raised at rallies. The animalization of politics today. Too many of our so-called freedom fighters behave like performers in a jungle stage. They chant death. They wear berets and red overalls like they're in costume. They curse in parliament. They mimic wildness and call it authenticity. But Makgatho was never a mimic. He was a model. He modeled what it meant to be African. Educated, composed, and spiritually whole. He stood for the idea that our liberation must reflect our highest selves, not our wounded reflexes. This is the truth that must be said. Mandela remained a committed Marxist to the end. Not in name only, but in tone, language, and spiritual omission. His speeches are echo chambers of ideology, not prayers of a man who feared or revered God Almighty. And that silence speaks louder than all his applause. Too many people throw the word communist around without knowing its spiritual DNA, that at its core, communism sees God as a threat to state control and faith as a rival to political ideology. Here is a sharp and educational insight. Sidebar. Communism is godless, by design, not by mistake. Many today don't realize that communism is not just an economic theory. It is a complete belief system, a worldview, a religion of its own. And at the center of that system is this declaration. There is no God, not metaphorically, not as opinion, but as doctrine. Marx hated God. The father of communism, Karl Marx, did not merely ignore God. He declared war on religion. He called religion the opium of the people, the sigh of the oppressed creature. To Marx, faith was weakness. God was a delusion used by the rich to pacify the poor, and in the world he imagined God had no place. Lenin enforced it. Vladimir Lenin, the man Mandela admired through communist doctrine, took Marx's ideas further. He said, every religious idea, every idea of God is unutterable vileness of the most dangerous kind. Under Lenin, churches were burned, priests were executed, Christian texts were banned. God had to be removed so the state could become supreme. Communism needs a godless society to work. Here is the core truth. Communism cannot survive where people fear God more than they fear government. If there is a higher law, then the state cannot be absolute. If there is a divine judge, then the Politburo cannot control truth. If people believe in heaven, then they won't worship revolution as salvation. So the solution? Erase God. That is what communism has always done. In Russia, in China, in Cuba, in North Korea, and subtly in South Africa through ideological infiltration. Communism and the ANC. When the ANC aligned itself with communist ideology in the 1950s and 60s, it imported more than strategy. It imported a worldview that sidelined prayer, moral accountability, and divine purpose. Even leaders raised in church, like Mandela, began to speak only of the people, the struggle, the movement, never of God, righteousness, or blessing. And that shift was spiritual sabotage. The people forgot their source. So today, when young South Africans chant struggle songs but do not kneel before their creator, when politicians speak of transformation but not of truth, when leaders demand loyalty but not holiness, know this: it is not by accident. It is the residue of a godless ideology. Communism taught us to organize power, not to honor the highest power, and we are still suffering under that lie. The way back if South Africa is to heal, it must not only fix its policies, it must rediscover its reverence. We must return to the way of Sefako Makgatho, to the God of Tiosoga, to the humility of the mission fathers, to the African path where leadership bows before the Almighty, not before Moscow, because a godless struggle can win the war, but it cannot bless the nation. Joe Slovo, God and the man we called Father. There are moments in a nation's story where silence shouts louder than sound. One such moment came on SAFM, on national radio, when the late Joe Slovo, the most powerful communist in South Africa's struggle years, was asked a simple question: do you believe in God? And his answer? He didn't whisper. He didn't dodge. He replied, I am trying to build heaven here on earth. And you ask me about a non-existent entity? This was not just a man. This was the mind behind Mandela. Slovo wasn't a fringe radical. He wasn't a guest on the sidelines. He was at the very center of Mandela's orbit. He was the architect of Umkhonto we Sizwe. He was a central figure in the ANC-SACP alliance. He helped shape the very documents, manifestos, and ideological posture of the liberation movement. And most importantly, he was a personal friend and trusted advisor to Nelson Mandela. Mandela never renounced Joe Slovo. He never challenged his godless worldview. He embraced him until the end. So what does it mean that Mandela, the father of the nation, chose this man as a brother? Let us pause. Imagine if the spiritual father of South Africa walked hand in hand with a man who mocked God, who believed heaven could be built without repentance, grace, or divine guidance, who believed man was God and history was a machine, to be bent by ideology. Now realize that was real. That happened. South Africa crowned a man as its father, who kept close the man who called God non-existent. When the father is silent about God, so are the sons. Slovo's vision became Mandela's environment. And Mandela in turn never spoke of God's guidance, never called upon divine protection in his speeches, never invoked blessing over the land, never asked for wisdom from above. He spoke with dignity, but without divinity. So today, what do we have? We have politicians who love power, but not principle. We have movements that quote Marx, but never Moses. We have youth who chant, but do not pray. We have elders who resist injustice, but cannot articulate righteousness. Why? Because the father of the nation walked with men who denied the father. Above godless foundations cannot hold the house. This is not just about Mandela. This is about spiritual infrastructure. You cannot build a nation on slogans, struggle songs, and silence about God, and expect it to stand in the storm. Joe Slovo wanted to build heaven here. But without God, all he built was a political stage and a moral void, and Mandela never corrected it. He only smiled through it. What must be said now? Let us now say it for the sake of the unborn generations. A nation cannot call a man father whose house has no altar. If you build a movement without God, you inherit a state without fear, without blessing, and without moral clarity. The ANC did not just lose its political credibility in the years after apartheid. It lost its spiritual covering, because it chose men who mocked God and leaders who were silent about heaven, while trying to build one from bricks and blood. Chapter 11. The people always, until they're not. There's a sickness, an inherent sickness, within communist ideology. It starts with seductive talk, words like equality, justice, the people, freedom from oppression. But always, it ends the same way. A bloated elite speaking on behalf of the poor while living off their backs. The fat cats of the people communists are master illusionists. They speak in the name of the worker, but never pick up a shovel. They claim to represent the hungry, but dine well in central committees. They hate capitalism, but live in its luxuries once they capture the state. From Moscow to Havana, from Beijing to Johannesburg, the pattern repeats like a virus. And here in South Africa, we've seen it with chilling familiarity. Leaders in red berets shout power to the people while they drive German sedans. They shout expropriate the land while sipping fine whiskey in gated suburbs. They talk anti-imperialism while vacationing in Dubai. This isn't revolution. It's political cosplay soaked in hypocrisy and self-worship. Let's talk about their god, Lenin. Let's strip away the romance and face facts. Vladimir Lenin is the saint of communism, the Red Prophet, the one who supposedly liberated the Russian people from the Tsar. But what did he actually do? He murdered, massacred, starved his own people, and built a secret police, Cheka, that tortured dissidents and burned books. He introduced red terror, not peace, censorship, not dialogue, forced collectivization, not shared prosperity. The Russian Civil War under Lenin saw millions of deaths. Peasants were slaughtered, priests were executed, intellectuals fled or were silenced. And even as he preached dictatorship of the proletariat, he became the dictator. You have to break a few eggs to make an omelette, they said. But those eggs were human lives. And the omelette? A state built on fear, lies, and unmarked graves. Always the same song, it's always the same. They speak for the people. Until the people ask questions, then come the boots. Then come the secret arrests. Then come the ration lines, the currency, collapse, the surveillance, and the fear. They abolish religion, not because it's false, but because faith competes with their authority. They destroy family values because loyalty to blood threatens loyalty to the party. They don't free people. They dominate them culturally, spiritually, politically. Why we must reject it every time. Mandela may have been seduced by the red gospel of struggle. Many in the ANC still are. But we must say it clearly now. Communism does not liberate. It replicates oppression under new branding, and always in the name of the people. But look at the people. Are they rising? Or are they queuing for crumbs while the cadres sit fat at the buffet of power? Let us never be fooled again. We don't need Marx to love justice. We don't need Lenin to fight inequality. We don't need red flags to restore the dignity of black South Africans. We need wisdom, not ideology. Self-reliance, not dependency. Truth, not propaganda. Real moral leadership, not firebrand speeches from political actors who hate capitalism. By day, but love Gucci by night. Let us throw off the red costume. Let us return to our own ancient path. African, rooted, disciplined, dignified. Because the people have suffered enough. They don't need more slogans. They need honesty. The first philosophy, the Khoisan way of seeing, before the first Dutch ship touched the Cape, before the British crown cast its shadow, before the Union and the ANC, there was already a philosophy here. It had no books, no cathedrals, no slogans, but it had spirit. It had language older than stone. It had a wisdom forged not in conquest but in listening. It was the philosophy of the Khoisan, South Africa's first people and first thinkers. To be in the land, not over it. the Khoisan, did not see the land as property. There were no title deeds, no fences, no profit. The land was alive, a relative, not a resource. It breathed. It pulsed. It gave when respected. It withdrew when abused. To live then was not to dominate nature, but to be in rhythm with it. This is not primitive thinking. It is advanced ecological and spiritual awareness. Where Europeans said, "This land is mine," the Khoisan whispered, "I belong to this land." This single difference in worldview birthed two civilizations, one rooted in extraction, the other in harmony. The sacred web of life. In Khoisan cosmology, everything is connected. Stars speak to animals. Dreams speak to ancestors. Death is not an end. It is a return to the wind. There is no separation between the physical and the spiritual. There is no hierarchy of life. The ant is as important as the antelope. Their language, clicks and tones, mirrors nature. It mimics birdsong, rustling trees, cracking fire. Speech itself was part of the earth's vibration. They lived slowly, attentively. They watched the moon. They knew which plants healed. They walked, never rushed, because the land taught patience. Conflict was not honorable in Khoisan society. There was no glory in war, no honor in bloodshed. Disputes were resolved through talk, ritual, and time. Violence was not a sign of power. It was a sign that wisdom had failed. They believed in soft authority, in leadership that listened, not shouted. The Sias, elder, was not the loudest, but the one who remembered best. Age, memory, and gentleness were the marks of strength. Imagine this ethic applied to Parliament today. The unrecorded soul of the nation South Africa is still trying to find its soul. But what if the soul was already defined by the Khoisan? What if national healing isn't a project to invent, but a return to what was already whole? Ubuntu may come from Bantu roots, but its heartbeat began with the Khoisan. I am because we are could just as easily be I am because the land is. The wisdom. We ignored colonizers, called them Bushmen. Missionaries called them heathens. Governments ignored them. But the Khoisan were not lost. They were silenced. Yet their worldview still hums beneath the soil. It waits in the wind. It pulses in the names of rivers. It lingers in the bones of every South African who longs for peace that isn't written in policy, but in the heart. What we must learn now, in an age of ecological collapse, political greed, and moral confusion. It may be the Khoisan philosophy, not imported ideologies, that offers the clearest light. Return to listening. Return to balance. Return to softness in leadership. Return to being in the land, not over it. Because the first people were also the first to know how to live well, and in that memory lies our map.
In the dawn's early light, we gather as one, the Khoisan people under a rising sun, with ancient wisdom passed through the ages. In the heart of the bush, our story engages. We move through the shadows, through thicket and tree, hunting our meat, it's the way of the free. The whispers of nature guide us along. In the rhythm of the wild, we find where we belong. In the bush, we roam on a sky so wide, with the spirit of our ancestors as our guide. In the harmony with nature, we tread lightly. The Khoisan people are heart shining brightly. We follow, tell stories untold. In the dance of the bush, our legacy unfolds. With spears in our hands, we move with the flow, the heartbeat of the land where the wild things grow. We honor the creatures, respect what we take, for survival means balance and a promise we make. Through rivers and rocks, across valleys so deep, the spirit of the hunt awakens from sleep. In the bush we roam on the sky so wide, with the spirit of our ancestors as our guide. In the harmony with nature we tread lightly. The Khoisan people, our hearts shining brightly. Falls softly, we gather around, with stories and laughter our unity found. Embers that dance in the cool evening air, celebrating our culture, our heritage rare. The echoes of history, the songs of the past, remind us of battles of love that holds fast. In the bush we roam on the sky so wide, with the spirit of our ancestors as our guide. In harmony with nature we tread lightly. The Khoisan people, our hearts shining brightly. So here's to the land, to the hunt, and the quest. To the Khoisan spirit we stand at our best. In the bush we will wander with pride and with grace, the heartbeat of our people, a timeless embrace. The Khoisan people, our hearts shining brightly. follow tell stories untold. In the dance of the bush, our legacy unfolds. With spears in our hands, we move with the flow. The heartbeat of the land where the wild things grow. Khoisan people, our hearts shining brightly. Khoisan people, our hearts shining brightly.
In the whispering woods where the shadows play, we roam with the spirits, the Khoisan way. With every soft step on the earth so old, we carry the stories, the legends untold. With the sun on our faces and the trees as our nest, we're the guardians of nature, forever blessed. We are the ancient people of the forest wide. In harmony with the earth, we stand with pride. With every hunt we bring forth our might, eating great meat under the stars at night. With the sound of the drums echoing clear, we dance with the fire, our hearts full of cheer. The rhythms of nature, they guide us through time. In the arms of the wild, our spirits will climb. From the roots of the trees to the skies up above, we nurture this land with our wisdom and love. We are the ancient people of the forest wide. In harmony with the earth, we stand with pride. With every hunt we bring forth our might, eating great meat under the stars at night. Through valleys and rivers we wander and roam. With each step we take, we find our way home. In the language of nature we speak and belong, bound to the earth where our hearts stay strong. We are the ancient people of the forest wide. In harmony with the earth, we stand with pride. With every hunt we bring forth our might, eating great meat under the stars at night. So listen to the whispers, the tales of the past. We are the Khoisan, our legacy will last. With the forest as friends and the stars shining bright, we celebrate life in the glow of the night.
If you were in the land, we had me. Forget me, get back to that. You can get back to that. If you bring me, get back to that. We learn healing, we can die. We live in great meat, under the stars at night. Through valleys and rivers, we wander in the roam, we nurture in the roam. We are the Khoisan, our legacy will last. With the forest as friends, and the stars shining bright, we celebrate life in the glow of the night. Through valleys and rivers, we wander and roam, we nurture this land with our wisdom and love. In the language of nature, we speak and belong, bound to the earth where our hearts stay strong.
So listen to the whispers, the tales of the past. We are the Khoisan, our legacy will last. With the forest as friends and the stars shining bright, we celebrate life in the glow of the night.